injuries I sustained were dislocations in my shoulder during violence, and I ended up having to have major surgery to put it back into place. I now have a prosthetic hip which failed, and so I had to have another one put in. And with the organisation, if you're on the front line, you're a resource. If you're sick or on recuperative duties, you can't do the tasks, but they can't let you go because you're injured and you're still part of that team. So therefore they compartmentalise you and they just basically try and get rid of you. So I got put in an office assisting the sergeant with his CCTV inquiries. Now I say did it reluctantly because at the time CCTV was something that the police readily dealt with, and it was cartridges. It was the old VHS. So somewhere on that 8-hour cartridge, a crime happened. Good luck, find it, you know? Press play, fast forward, rewind, fast forward, rewind, press play. That tape had been used so many times, it degraded so much that the images were hardly visible, let alone evidentially viable for court. So it wasn't a popular thing with police officers. It was literally walking around with a dirty diaper. How can I get rid of this? And the quickest way to do it, no viable image. Bin it, bag it, drop it, sign it off, next crime. You know?
Bizarrely, the first CCTV was at Peenemünde, where they were doing the V2 rocket testing in Germany. Of course, you can't stand next to the rocket when it flies off, so that was probably the first ever CCTV there. In UK, one of the biggest cases that occurred was a murder of a young lad called Jamie Bulger, about in the early 90s, who was about 2, I think, and he was taken away by some boys and brutally murdered. All sorts of sexual wickedness was done to him. But at the time, the police recovered the CCTV from the shopping centre in Liverpool, and it showed him being taken away by these boys. Now, if that CCTV hadn't have existed, the police would have probably thought, oh, it's adult paedophiles have taken him. And so the CCTV really showed the value of how it can help solve crime. And the government went crazy, really, and spent loads of money and just funded CCTV cameras for the local authorities all over the country. There is an estimate of 4.3 million in UK. I think that's the famous one that's always quoted. But I suppose England or UK has always bumbled around the middle. You know, we've never had extreme governments. And so when I spoke to, say, a Dutch guy, he would say, well, you've never been invaded. So you've got a place which is ripe, where surveillance is just accepted. And then you've got these incidents like the Jamie Bulger murder, which occur, which demonstrate the value. So that we had this mass proliferation of CCTV.
Well, I work compressed hours for personal reasons, so I was doing an 11-hour day. And most of that I spent in front of the screen. And it was only when it got pointed out to me or I got sat down to do these tests that I realised, whoa, hang on a minute. I could look at a person for half a second and that person's face is in my head. I've got no control on it, and I'll be walking along on my lunch break and oh, that person was on the Underground, that person got on a King's Cross. Watching TV is a horror because I would just look at people in the background. And it's like, wow, where have I seen that person before? Oh, that's who it is. You know? Got no control of that at all. It would just happen. Sometimes it used to happen like 3 in the morning. And then I Google it, go back to see if I was right. So in some ways it's like a curse. But ironically, I felt it was, everybody could do it. It was only when it became of interest to me that I realised that there's a small percentage of the population who have this prosopagnosia, where they're face blind through trauma, or could be through a stroke or impact injury or something, but they don't remember faces. They might remember the voice and the clothing, but they don't remember the face. And I apparently am on the other end of it.
So a super recognizer is a human being who has been born with this innate ability, which might be a hereditary thing, to remember faces and recall them after a long period of time. So one of the best tests once was in a theatre where, you know, there's hundreds of people in the theatre. The super recognizer goes in, he scans the crowd, he goes outside, and then 3 people switch, you know. And when he comes back in, he says like that, 1, 2, 3, like, you know. So one of the key times we showed it really worked was the murder of a girl called Alice Gross, Gross. And she was a teenager. There's iconic footage of it, really. She's seen walking over a canal bridge in West London. This was the key moment. And then about 10 minutes later, this guy comes on a bike. But the 2 of them had vanished. So it's a case of what's happened. Has he kidnapped her? Has he killed her? If he's kidnapped her, has he got her locked up in a flat in West London? Has he kidnapped her and taken her back to Latvia or wherever he comes from? And so the first thing was to get all the cameras in that area, all the shop videos, the cameras on the streets. And so we were confronted with tens of thousands of hours of footage. And to give some example of this, the murder squad had hired out this office bit with the computers to view CCTV. They'd hired that for 12 weeks. That's how long they thought it would take to go through. Within 2 weeks, the super recognisers solved the case.
So the murder wasn't there, but the victim's movements were very visible. The investigation officer wanted to know if the victim was being followed or there'd been an incident out on the street. And I was given about a dozen venues who had tendered 24 hours worth of CCTV footage for me to review in the hope that I could find this suspect. And that would keep me awake at night. Have I missed anything? Has he gone past and I've not seen him? And it literally was. I mean, there's quite a few people coming and going. It was quite busy. Then he just walked past the camera. Then I fast forwarded it, waited for him to come back. And as he came back, he kind of looked towards the camera, but not at the camera. And the image was slightly fuzzy, but it was enough for me to think, yeah, that's him. Damn it, that is him.
I think it was a CCTV from somebody's house. And it was almost a fraction of his face was captured just entering a pathway by the side of the river. As he was found there, they got the footage of the other side of the river, and he was found leaving on the other side. And as it was, somebody went down there on a bike. It took them 5 minutes to get from one point to another, whereas he'd taken about an hour. So it was obvious something was going down. And then they found him in a shop, and it was a sort of newsagent shop. I remember the footage, you could see all the sweets and stacks, but you could see like water on the floor where he was walking around in this shop. So he must have been wet through, you know, as he was walking. He got off his bike drenched, really. And now, by whatever means, they sussed out that the guy on the bike was Eastern European and had a conviction for murder in East Europe. And so he becomes the main suspect here. But the river there had actually been searched before, and nothing had been found. But because he was wet, they researched the river, and they searched it again, and they found her, because she'd been heavily concealed under a massive tyre and a log.
What I'm looking for really sounds a bit harsh, but I'm looking for defects. I'm looking for marks, scars, things you can't change, things you can't alter. Ears are fantastic. Luckily, I know the terminology now. So I would look at the overall shape of the ear. I would look at the size of the earlobe. Is the earlobe fused to the sides of the head, or is it completely detached? Is it bulbous? Is it small? Is it large? Does it turn out? Does it turn in? Does it have an oblique crease in it? Then I'll have a look at the knobbly bit that sits above it, called the antitragus. Does that turn in? Does that poke up? Is it smooth? Is it indented? Is it convex? Is it concave? Then I could go to the concha, this shell-like place in the ear. So, right, is that C-shaped? Is it very wide, very narrow, very deep? And I'll have a look at the skin fold on the outer edge of the ear. Is that thin? Is it thick? Is it pinched? Does it bend in? Does it bend out? Then I could look at the inside of the ear here. Does that stand proud? Is it smooth? Is it crinkly? Then you've got this little triangular bit at the top here. Is that wide, narrow, deep? Is it two-forked, three-forked? Is it missing? So all these things are quite unique to that individual. It's like a fingerprint.
I think it was a New Year's Eve of 2016. It was around the time where the German Chancellor Merkel had allowed allegedly Syrian refugees into the country. Masses and masses of young men who were from all over the world, really, not really Syrian. And they gathered in the Cathedral Platz, and there was a mass sex attacks, touching girls, grabbing hold of girls, which the authorities tried to cover up for 3 days. There was no reporting on this at all. And then it got out via social media, because a lot of the girls had taken videos of taking pictures of these guys. It was very political. The head of the police was sacked. And so the German police contacted the commissioner, and the commissioner said we should go. So I got 2 super recognisers together. and we flew to Cologne. And we arrived on a Sunday night, so the first thing we did, we went to the Cathedral Platz. And what struck me was the lack of CCTV. There was 2 cameras on the outside of the main railway station. There was none on the cathedral. If I'd been confronted with this in Waterloo Station, there would have been 200 cameras. And there's all sorts of historic and cultural reasons why German people don't want surveillance, you know. Extreme fascist or communist governments. But of course, nearly everybody has a camera themselves these days, and that's where most of the evidence came from. I think about 200 of these characters got prosecuted in the end.